Hello, and welcome to
Bell on Earth.
My name is Cassidy,
My name is Casey.
and together we are the Bell Sisters. Join us each week as we corrupt your soul,
And bring you to salvation.
discussing life, death, and everything in between.
Are you afraid of getting into heaven?
Hello,
And welcome back.
to Bell on Earth.
The podcast.
I'm Cassidy,
I'm Casey.
and we're here today to do a discussion on some more problematic topics.
Yes, we're here, we're queer, and we're gonna talk about veganism. One of the most hated topics on the internet.
For real, it honestly is one of the most hated topics.
And as someone who's been vegan, I also hate the topic, so I get it.
Same. As someone who's been vegetarian for years now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's one of those topics that all the queers love, so that's why we're doing it.
Yeah. And it also kind of flows somewhat from our last topic of antinatalism, because a lot of antinatalists will also be vegan, so it kind of ties into that a little bit too.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to do this as the next episode, because it flows really well with antinatalism. Again, a lot of antinatalists are also vegan because of their moral obligation, I guess, to suffering and to hurting any sentient life. That's kind of the whole point of antinatalism. So a lot of them do end up being vegan, and it kind of works really well just to flow from that topic to this one.
Yeah, exactly. And again, as the season is titled, it ends up being problematic for various reasons. Obviously, being vegan itself is not necessarily the issue. It's more how people interact with the diet and with the philosophy behind it.
Yeah, again, it's the same thing as the concept of antinatalism. The actual act of being child-free or an antinatalist isn't necessarily problematic, but the discussions that we have around these topics become incredibly heated and problematic from both sides,
yes.
Right? On both sides of the aisle, you have people who are creating issues for no reason when we can just have these philosophical discussions around these things and try to create a better environment for everyone and not just for a specific set of people. Instead, we can create a better world and kind of have these discussions instead of getting defensive about our own beliefs.
Yeah.
Which ultimately ends up being the problem, is people get very defensive about their moral beliefs or their ethical concerns around different things, particularly when it comes to harming sentient life like animals.
Yeah, and I've said this when it comes to political topics too, is that I hate when topics, I mean, I guess this is just the natural progression of certain things, and especially with the internet and whatnot, but it becomes annoying when you're labeled as one thing just because a topic leans one way or the other.
Yeah.
When it comes to a lot of topics that become political, the actual topic itself is just a topic, but then it becomes politicized. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes this, extreme view that, I apparently have, when it's no. I can just have a view on something and that, be a view. And, everyone can have their own view on whatever they want. And, it doesn't really have to be this, extreme case of, this or that.
Yeah.
If someone's a vegan, they can be a fucking vegan, but, they don't have to force it on me, and I don't have to force anything on them. They could just exist with this view.
Exactly. It's you get mushed in with the loudest voices when often the majority of what people think and feel about different topics, it comes from, that silent majority. Mm-hmm. The loud minority don't speak for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's not really fair to mix them in. So with that being said, I think we should talk a little bit about our own experiences with, I guess, just veganism and also our diets in general. If you don't know, I've been a vegetarian since I was 10 years old. I stopped eating meat, 16 years ago now, which is crazy. Yeah. Almost 17.
Ew.
Yeah.
Triggered.
I know. It's crazy. But I stopped eating meat. I, at the time, just really didn't like it. I have never liked meat, even as a baby. I would spit it out. It's just never been my thing. In more ways
You were
than
a
one.
libtard from birth.
Yeah, I was born one. It was God. And also, shout out to Mrs. Naiello, who I know listens to the pod, because you're the one who inspired me to become vegetarian. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Naiello, she was a vegetarian, and so I was like, oh, I don't have to eat meat, so I can just be this, and then I can stop being forced to eat meat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I love, because I think we come from different stances when it came, obviously we have some like overlapping themes, but I think we come from different stances in terms of like why we did the diet, or why we like, I mean, I'm not vegan anymore, but I was full vegan for a little while. For me, at least, I had like a history of eating disorders, so like food in general was like,
Same.
yeah, twinning. So like food in general was just like it was a touchy topic, and for me to transition into eating strictly vegan was like kind of healing for me, because it allowed me to like eat basically whatever I wanted within this certain like category and not really feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Because I was like, not only is it like nutritious stuff that I'm eating, but also it's like fairly low calorie, so I can eat more volume and not like feel guilty.
Yeah.
And also I just like felt lighter. Like people have said this, and like I noticed it about myself, but like my eyes got lighter.
Oh.
Yeah, like the color of my eyes like became lighter. And I've heard other people say the same thing about theirs, and like that's something that's really interesting to me, that it kind of like it shows. And I just like I felt really light, and honestly like I felt really good when I was vegan. The reason I personally transitioned out of it, also I should add that like for me, again, it was the like dietary and like mental thing. I also am lactose intolerant, which I like ignored for most of my life.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, I didn't really understand, obviously, as a child, what it meant to be lactose intolerant. I didn't know that like eating 3 bowls of ice cream was why I was constipated constantly.
Wait, did you get diagnosed, or you just figured it out?
No, I just stopped eating a lot of dairy and was like, wow, I can like poop regularly.
That's amazing.
I know. So there was that too. And of course, like I've always loved animals, and you know, like the more that you get involved in like vegan culture, I suppose, like the more research you do and the more you're exposed to the what is it called? Like the commercialization of food and like animal welfare and all that kind of stuff. And like it's really disgusting. And obviously I didn't mention this part, but I was younger when I did this. I was still in high school, and like high school, college-ish. And so I had more resources, because I wasn't like just buying my own food on my own dime. So like thankfully like our parents did actually like kind of like they weren't vegan or vegetarian themselves, but like they would support the diets that we chose for ourselves.
Yeah.
Which was nice.
Yeah, very grateful for that.
Yeah.
To have like parents that supported it, because I know a lot of people who their parents will just like not allow them to be vegan or vegetarian, which is ridiculous. I actually personally think, and Mom can correct us if we're wrong, saying
She
that
will.
she listens, but I think that like me going vegetarian was almost easier on her, because then she didn't have to like shove chicken down my throat.
Yeah.
I would not eat it.
Yeah.
So, you know,
This is
kind
true.
of worked out.
And I think what was interesting for you in your circumstance was also that you became vegetarian in a time when it wasn't like a common
Yeah.
diet for people to have. So especially when we would go out to eat and stuff like that, like it was really hard to find food to eat besides fucking pasta and butter.
Yeah, that's mainly what I ate whenever we went out, was usually pasta, salad. I basically didn't really order things for a very long time. And that's a really good point. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I was vegetarian way before a lot of like the more commercialized parts of it came about. Like there was Boca Burgers, and Morningstar had just come out very, very early on in Morningstar.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like there weren't really alternatives at this point. A lot of people were not vegan and vegetarian. Like it was not a movement. Like there were obviously people out there who were vegan, vegetarian. Like, it's been around for a long time.
Right.
Hundreds
and
of
even, like, certain
centuries.
cultures are, like, mainly vegetarian.
Yeah.
Like so it's not like it was crazy, but...
It wasn't like I invented vegetarianism. But I'm
Your ego might say so.
Yeah, like, my main character syndrome says so, but it wasn't, like... It wasn't me.
Like, every restaurant you went to, they're like, wow, maybe we should include vegan options.
Like, there's a market for that.
Wow.
But
This one child
can't eat her. No, I do also want to say that I was technically pescatarian until I was 16, and then I gave up fish at that point because I just felt like it was kind of time to, like, give up fish. I felt like a fake vegan. Or not, I wasn't vegan, but I felt like a fake vegetarian. So, and I also just kind of, like, wanted to cut it out of my diet, so I did.
Did you enjoy eating fish?
Some fish. There's not, like, too much of it that I miss. Or I don't really miss fish at all, but there were certain things I did like. Like, I liked shrimp, and I liked lobster.
But, like, you had to, like, pause and be deep in thought. Like, I liked shrimp and, yeah, like, lobster.
Well, yeah, because, like, honestly, I don't remember, like, loving it. Like, it wasn't really my thing. It's the same thing. It's a texture thing for me. Like, I can't handle the texture. And a lot of people are quite surprised when I say that because, like, I've always been, like, kind of teased for being a vegetarian, like, since I was young, because it wasn't super popular when we were kids.
And it's just, like, an easy target type thing.
Yeah, and, like, the jokes were always the same, which I think we should talk about a little bit later, but
yeah.
I was teased for it quite a bit, which was always, like, made me, like, laugh, because I was like, you guys are not funny, and this is dumb.
And I've heard this 8 times.
Yeah, like, you're not original or funny, like.
But they always think they're, like, the first to come up with it.
I know, like.
Anyway.
Girl, shut up.
Embarrassing.
But, oh my god, I forgot what my point was.
Oh, the texture?
Oh, yeah. So I'll tell people because, like, I do obviously care about animals and I do support animal rights and all that stuff. But at the time, like, when I was 10, like, yes, it was still a thing I was conscious of, but I wasn't, like, very conscious of it. Like, I was 10. So it wasn't something I was like, animals. Like, I didn't really, like, think about it. I was just like, I don't like this. Like, I don't like the texture. I can't eat this. Hamburgers, I could only have a very specific way if, like, my mom cooked them. I wasn't a huge, like, steak fan. Like, I just never liked it. And people will always be like, oh, well, you just haven't had good meat, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, bitch, like, I have. Like, we've had different types of stuff. Like, I just don't like it. I don't like the texture. As of right now, like, I live with a professional cook. Like, I have had, like, good food before. Like, sorry, I have.
Like, not for nothing, but, like, we went to, like, decent restaurants growing up, and, like, our mom was, like, pretty good at cooking, and, like, we had a lot of, like, options.
Right. All of that to say, like, I've had good meat before. Like, I specifically don't like it. Like, I really don't. I don't think it tastes good. I don't like the texture of it. Again, like, it really is, like, a huge texture thing for me. Like, specifically chicken. Chicken, like, freaks me out. I don't know what it is, but, like, later on, like, nowadays, I get freaked out because I see it as, like, skin and bones and meat, and, like, I can't really, like, disconnect those. But even as a kid, like, even when I could kind of disconnect it, like, it's just gross.
There's still something about it.
Yeah. So then people will be like, so you don't care about animals? And, like, they'll then tease me about that.
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, dude, like, no, like, I really just don't like meat. I don't like the taste of it. It doesn't do it for me. Like, it's just not my thing. And so that's, like, my reasoning behind going vegetarian. And it's funny, actually, because you had brought up, like, your history with eating disorders and stuff, and, like, that never had anything to do with my, like, history of eating disorders or anything like that.
Yeah.
It, like, never really, like, even clicked in my mind, like, oh, like, people do that. Because people do go vegan or vegetarian to become, like, more orthorexic, which is a type of eating disorder where you're very focused on, like, eating healthy foods and stuff like that, and that can be a very big problem for certain people, but that never really was, like, even something I thought about. when it came to, like, having issues with eating or anything else. Like, it wasn't even a thought in my mind. Like, I really just didn't like it, and I cut it out because I didn't like it. And I don't see myself ever going back to eating meat full time. Like, I'll still try things. Like, I tried snails when we went to France, or, like, I wanted to try kangaroo when I went to Australia. I didn't end up doing that, but, you know.
The thought was there.
Like, I've thought about it, and, like, I wouldn't mind it. But I've tried it since then, and I still don't like it. Like, it's not something I would order off of a menu. It's not something I'd bring home for myself. And I don't see, like, a big issue with that.
And I think also, like, part of it, I mean, I don't know if this is, like, true for you, but, like, part of it is, like, well, actually, I'm sure it is, given the amount of time you've been vegetarian.
Yeah.
But obviously, like, once you haven't eaten meat in so long, like, your body cannot digest it in the same way that someone who, like, does eat it has, or, like, has the capability to. So, like, even if you do order it, it's, like, you can only have a bite of it, really. You can't even have a full meal, because otherwise, like, you'll be fucked up.
Yeah.
Even, like, broth and stuff can sometimes do that.
Yeah, so I haven't noticed that so much with broth, because I do, not regularly, but I do consume, like, chicken broth every once in a while, just, like, if it's in something. I don't really, like, I'm not, especially when I go out, I'm not super picky, because it's just, I've dealt with it my entire life, so... like we were saying, like, it wasn't really an option to get, like, fully vegetarian meals for a very long time. So having, like, broth and things like that, like, I just kind of deal with it, not necessarily taste it, so it doesn't bother me that much. But I have had instances where I have had meat and it has fucked me up, like, really, really bad.
Yeah, well, I know it has to do with something like the enzymes that your body produces to break down the, like, meat itself. I don't think it stops producing it, but, like, it certainly dwindles down. So, like, when you have meat, it, like, kind of freaks out because it's like, how the fuck do I process this?
Yeah.
Whereas I'm sure, like, with a broth, obviously, there might be a little bit in it, but it's not going to be to the same extent as eating, like, an actual piece of meat.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know how all that, like, necessarily works, but I do know that ultimately it's a lot harder for me to digest it just because I haven't had it in a long time.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably true for, like, most diets. Like, if you haven't had, like, certain things in a long time, your body does need time to adjust to it. So it would just be, like, if I were to switch back, I'd have to, like, increase it, like, slightly every day, basically.
Well, even when because I was vegan for, honestly, I don't even know how long. I think I started when I was...
You were 16.
I was 16, right?
Yeah, so...
And then I stopped when I moved out here. So it was at least, like, 5-ish years.
Yeah, I'd say about
around there. And again, I was vegan. I wasn't just vegetarian, so I was going without meat and dairy products. People might call me a fake vegan, because I would still eat shit. I was saying shit or stuff, and it came out as chef. But
Fair.
I would eat, like, honey and stuff like that, like, technically, if you're gonna be, like, full restricted vegan, like, they don't eat that.
Yeah.
So I might have some haters now.
We've already had
We've had haters. But, like, again, for me, it was just, that's the thing, is everyone has their own reason. And, like, my reason was to heal myself, and also, like, in regards to animal welfare, which... Once I transitioned back, like, as we were talking about, I had to do it slowly, and I started with, like, chicken, because that's typically the easiest. Like, I think white meat in general is just easier on your body.
Yes.
Actually, I think I started with fish, and then chicken.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Honestly, I don't even fully remember, but I just started with whatever was going to be easiest on me, and in small portions, and just, like, gradually ate more. For me, when I transitioned back, it was, like, partially because I was doing better in, like, recovery, but also, like, for me, I've always loved eating. I mean, I'm a Taurus, so I love to eat, according to every fucking post ever. But I do, like, I love to eat, and I also... Like, I am someone who is not a picky eater whatsoever. And I love being able to experience new cultures and, like, just understand people better through food. I think food is such an expressive form of human culture.
True.
Both on an individual level and on, like, a cultural level. And I I mean, like you, like when you went to France, like you tried snails. Like I think like that in itself, like you're experiencing their culture through their food. And like that's such a big thing. And not that I've really had the ability yet to travel a lot outside of the country, but even just within the country or again, like family to family. Like I like being able to go over to someone's house and like eat whatever they make me. I like being able to like learn about people through food. And so that was part of it, was that like I was always around different kinds of food, especially being in New York and even like moving down here to Texas. Like, again, I just wanted to be able to experience food for what it is.
I totally get that.
And so that was, like, part of the reason I transitioned back to. And also, like, a little bit more recently, I've been getting into, like, bodybuilding and, like, growing muscle and stuff. And don't get me wrong, you can absolutely grow muscle on a plant-based diet. 100%. And, like, this is something... What was that look for?
They can't see my looks.
Well, we'll get into this as a topic. But my standpoint from what I've seen, if you're doing it right, you can absolutely gain muscle and build your mass using plant-based protein. Obviously, it's complicated, but again, we'll delve deeper into that in a minute. But for me, it was just easier, honestly, to be able to, and cheaper, to be able to use meat as my protein source. And it's hard because, like... Obviously, I still care about the animal welfare side. I wish that I could do more personally. I mean, I work in, like, the animal field, so, like, in a way, I feel like I play my part for animal care.
Yeah.
But I still could be doing way more. And, like, again, it's not that I don't care about what I'm putting in my body and, like, where it's coming from. But it's, like, if I can... Like, does my budget allow me to buy... like local farm food versus like a $5 pack of chicken? Like, unfortunately, it's like sometimes there is that give and take.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a great transition into the actual topic that we're talking about, which is just veganism in general. So I guess, what is veganism, right? Veganism is basically the abstaining of consuming animal products, like you said, meat, seafood, eggs, dairy, honey, anything that's produced by animals is something that a vegan doesn't consume. Also, I think a lot of people, especially on their like veganism journey, tend to also be more of a lifestyle vegan, which also means not consuming any leather, any products that have been tested on animals or use some type of animal protein or like gelatin or something like that in them. A lot of people will also, which I don't know if I totally recommend, but a lot of people will stop taking medicine because a lot of medicine is made with different parts of the animal. I believe like powders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
A lot of sugar is like has like animal bones and stuff like that in it, so they don't eat that. Sriracha is also not vegan. Yeah,
I actually didn't know that.
White sugar is not vegan. Sriracha is not vegan.
What's in sriracha?
White sugar.
Oh,
yeah. Obviously, like, gelatin is not vegan, so any type of gelatin pill or supplement, that's not vegan.
God.
There's a lot of stuff.
Trying to stop eating gummies was honestly the hardest part of the fucking vegan diet for me.
Yeah, I can totally see that. But there's a lot of stuff that's not vegan, and it can be quite tricky, because also, too, like, you can buy a product and do a ton of research, which is something that I try to do my best with, like, not buying certain products because they've tested on animals, or trying to be more ethical with my spending when it comes to like beauty or skincare, whatever.
Yeah, vegan or not, it's like always good to do your research on what you're actually putting in your body or on your body.
Exactly, yeah. But it can be really hard because sometimes you'll like do all this research and you're like, okay, great, this product is vegan, this product comes from an ethical company, blah, blah, and then, like, you go on the internet and, like, 2 days later you see a reel and they're like, this product tests on animals, or this has, like, a very tiny % of this or that, and I'm like, God fucking damn it.
You can't escape it.
It's so hard. And ethical consumption is something I could talk about all day, but in terms of veganism, it's very, very difficult to find products that aren't tested on animals, that don't use animal byproducts, that don't have anything in them, like, it's very, very difficult. So it's something you have to be like really conscious about.
And even like labels can be misleading because like they're allowed to slap on certain labels without it being fully true.
Yeah, don't even get me started about like food product labeling. It's so ridiculous. But there are like vegan alternatives that are not fully vegan and things like that, and it just becomes like a whole thing.
Yeah.
Also, like, technically, like, a lot of places do allow for a certain amount of, like, bugs and things, so, like, that becomes, like, non-vegan, like, flour and things like that. So you have to be very, very particular and careful when it comes to, like, living a fully, if you were to, like, really, really invest your time and energy into it, like, being a full, like, vegan is very, very difficult, especially in America in this day and age. I'm sure in other countries this may not be as difficult or maybe more difficult. I don't really know. But particularly in America, it's very difficult, very hard, because you're limited in the places that you consume, the products that you have. Because realistically, most products that you see on the shelves come from like 5 different companies.
Yeah.
And that could be a whole episode for another day, but you're really consuming only from about 5 different companies, if that, and most of them are all owned by the same people. They all kind of own each other.
Yeah.
Again, a whole other topic. But, like, by purchasing that product, you're still contributing to, like, this person's profit, and that person, like, tests on animals, and so it's, like, a whole thing when it comes to, like, ethical consumption. But ultimately, that's what a vegan is someone who just tries their very best to abstain from purchasing or consuming any type of animal or animal byproducts. With that being said, like, again, it is a diet, but it's also something much more than that.
Yeah, it becomes, like you said, a lifestyle for a lot of people.
And I think that's where a lot of people kind of confuse it sometimes because, like, they really focus in on the diet part. But I think that's only a very small percentage of what veganism actually is, because veganism also extends into, again, like we were talking about, antinatalism. It extends into minimalism. It extends into, like, all these different topics and philosophies that people follow.
Yeah.
And it's
and religions.
Religions. It's really, like, the center of a lot of different things. So it's not just one thing. It's not just a diet. It is something that's a lot bigger than that. Yeah. I think where people have the biggest problem with vegans, because listen, I'm vegetarian, I eat eggs and dairy, and really not even dairy, I eat eggs and cheese. I don't drink milk or anything because I just don't like it.
Well, butter.
Yeah, I have butter too, and yogurt, stuff like that. But it's mainly eggs, cheese, like mild dairy products. But for the most part, I am very vegetarian. And again, like, my consumption, I also try to be as ethical as possible. Where I think a lot of people have a lot of issues with vegans is honestly the fact that vegans are incredibly annoying. Yeah. Like, they're some of the most annoying people, at least that I've ever encountered. And no hate to them necessarily, but, like, a little bit
of hate.
Because, like,
depends on who you are.
They just, like, don't know how to chill. A lot of them don't know how to chill.
See, like, when you're talking about, like, how in-depth veganism can be, it just, like, the thing that popped into my head was, like, honestly, to be a full vegan, and I mean, like, diet, lifestyle, etc., like, you need to be neurotic.
Yeah.
Like, you need to.
Yeah.
Because, like, you literally have to be conscious of every single fucking thing that you do. And to some extent, like, that can drive you insane, especially in the country and the culture that we live in.
Yeah. It's something that, honestly, as someone who tries to be as ethical as possible, but also someone who is, like, a sociologist, it's very, very hard for me to live in this world and feel, like, not neurotic, to be honest. I don't know who out there has seen The Good Place, but I often align myself with Chidi a lot of the time. If you don't know what The Good Place is, it's basically a show with Kristen Bell and Ted Danson.
Shout out our cousin.
Yeah.
She doesn't know she's our cousin, but we're going to call her a cousin.
Yeah. All the Bells are cousins. That's just how it works.
Exactly.
But anyway, it's basically a show about people who have died and gone to heaven, right? That's the whole premise. But there's this one character, Chidi, and Chidi is someone who is I believe he's a, like, philosophy teacher or professor, and he is just someone who cannot make a decision to save his life. And it's because of all the things that he has to think about when it comes to the purchases that he makes. And ultimately, it's how he dies, because he is trying to go out to, like, dinner with his friend or whatever, and he ultimately is stuck in such decision paralysis that he dies because an air conditioner falls on him, which is crazy. And that's a little bit of a spoiler, but it's not too much of a spoiler. That happens pretty early on. You find that out, and that has nothing really to do with the plot of the show. But ultimately, like, that's how I feel so much of the time. And it's so funny because there's even this line in the show where he's talking about like his moral setbacks and like the things that made him not necessarily a bad person, but just like made him not a great person. And he was like, I know I should have had almond milk. I knew that it consumed more water than other types of milk, but I still drank it. And that's how I feel sometimes. Yes. I feel like, oh my God, like I'm using almond milk, but I know that almond milk uses a lot of water. Yeah. And so it's not technically ethical because you're over consuming water to grow almonds.
Even though it's vegan, it might not be ethical, and like there's so many layers to it.
Exactly. And then also like the type of almond milk that you're buying could also be connected to a company that I don't find necessarily ethical. And then you have to go down the rabbit hole of who is manufacturing these almonds. How do you get the people there who are manufacturing them? Like, what is going on with the farms? What is going on with the soil? And it becomes this whole like stratosphere of like, I can't make any decision because everything I do is unethical.
And that's just almond milk.
Yeah, and that's just almond milk. And that plays into that show. It's a great show. I highly recommend it. But it's those types of things that I think really contribute to how people who decide to go vegan think. And there's other types of people who also kind of go down those rabbit holes. It's not just vegans. But I think that's part of the reason that so many people are so incredibly annoying is because they're constantly racking their brains with all this stuff. And if you don't rack your brain with all this stuff, then you kind of just like literally sit in this like paralysis of like, well, I don't even know what's good for me, so I'm just going to follow what everyone else is doing. And what everyone else is doing is chastising all these people for eating meat, so I'm just going to do that because that seems to be the most ethical route. And I think there are some people who don't necessarily think about it that way, but they just kind of do it because that like they can't like process all of the things that come with eating or living in a world that is highly unethical. Like there's really no way to go out and not be unethical. Everything you do has some type of carbon footprint, something that harms someone else to some degree. As much as like vegans, I think, really truly care about being ethical and doing their best to fight for animals and stuff like that, it's almost impossible to still call it a ethical diet because most commercial farms where you're getting your fruits and vegetables from are not ethical. A lot of them kidnap people or underpay their workers, or a lot of farms have a lot of like migrant workers where they'll hold your papers hostage. They do not provide good living conditions. They treat their workers absolutely horrendous. And a lot of people forget to think about that when it comes to consuming any type of food, right? Whether it be because, you know, the dairy farms and the meat farms don't take care of their workers either. And honestly, I think they're kind of worse, which is kind of why I side a little bit more with vegans, because like while there are really horrible things happening on regular farms, it's a lot worse on the dairy and meat farms.
Especially when it's like now not only you're treating people poorly, but you're treating animals poorly too. So it's like everyone's just taking the shit end of the stick.
Yeah, and you're putting people in like really horrible conditions.
Yeah.
And animals, of course. Like, a lot of, like, everything about that is really horrible. And you're desensitizing people, right? Yes. Because you're ripping calves away from their mothers, or you're putting chickens into these tiny little cages, and you're treating them horrible.
Traumatizing people.
Yeah, yeah. And it becomes very, very hard for all sides of the, like, for everyone in that situation. And also, it's a lot more dirty and things like that. But at the same time, like, when you think about growing vegetables, stuff like that, like, the overconsumption of certain products, especially things that are trendy like avocados and acai, and like we were talking about almond milk, like these things are also not great for the earth either because we're overproducing them. That hurts the soil. It hurts the areas in which these places, you know, producing the product. For example, like I know avocados, a lot of deforestation happens because of the production of avocados. You have pesticides to worry about, and that honestly, like, pesticides I think are some of the worst things that have, like, entered our lives. I think that's why so many people are so sick, is because of pesticides. And there's ways to farm without pesticides. Like, there's all these things, and, you know, people, especially in countries where there are less regulations, they are farming with very, very little PPE. They're not using proper equipment. And so they're like spraying all these pesticides and it just goes straight into their face. and they're being put into these situations where they get incredibly sick and incredibly ill and lose limbs or their lives or get cancer very, very early. A lot of these places also use child labor, which there's a whole debate about that, because it's like, well, these kids are, providing resources and money for their families, and at the same time, can we create a world that doesn't require child labor? Like, come on. Also, for certain products like soaps or shampoos, conditioners, things like that, it requires something called palm oil. Palm oil is incredibly unethical to farm. It's very, very dangerous. A lot of people have to climb trees. They fall out of the trees, they die. And I'm talking about 10, 11-year-old kids. And these are just like tiny little things. Like palm oil is like a negated amount is in soaps and conditioners and stuff. And these are things that people are dying over. Right? Yeah. So there's all of this stuff that comes with the production of food and of products that we don't necessarily always think about, but it turns into this whole thing. And that's why you can't even say that veganism is entirely ethical, because it's still harming someone. Now, again, is it potentially more ethical than harming animals? Sure, yeah. And I do think it's really great to fight for animal rights. But there's still a lot of unethical practices that go into any type of product. And so these are the things that I think people tend to forget about when having discussions around it. And that's why I find a lot of these people to be very hypocritical and also very annoying, because they profit themselves as if they are the end-all be-all perfect person because they're not harming animals. But then they're still ignoring all of the horrible treatment that people go through to make these products.
Yeah, and I think that's where people get really frustrated with vegans in general, is the hypocrisy of it. Because it's like, if you are not completely, once again, like neurotic about the ingredients and being completely ethical, then it's like, well, what platform do you really have to stand on to like shame other people?
Yeah.
And then it's like, on the other hand, like even if you are doing all of that, like that doesn't really make you necessarily like better or worse, because I think we all suffer under the same system, and it's just like a shame. And not for nothing, but a lot of the time the products and foods that are the quote unquote like most ethical kinds end up being way more expensive.
Yes.
And it's like, well, like I was saying before, it's not always practical for people to be consuming ethically, not because they don't want to, but because you just can't afford it. Mm-hmm. Like, not everyone, I mean, again, not that Whole Foods is like the end-all be-all for like ethical consumption itself, but like a lot of those products end up being in places like that are just like more expensive in general. Like, not everyone can shop there.
Well, also, I love that you brought up the topic of Whole Foods, because realistically, Whole Foods does not exist in the majority of this country, right? Like, you have Whole Foods that are being built in affluent areas, and that's a really, really good point, because places like, again, like Whole Foods, but like also Trader Joe's, mm-hmm. or any of these other health food type stores, Sprouts, anything like that, they're not being built in poor areas for people to access.
Yeah.
And that's something else that we have to also consider, is when you're thinking about veganism or any type of diet, really, it's not accessible to the majority of the people in this country, because they don't live in a place where they can even obtain those types of products. In a lot of places in this country, we have things that are called food deserts, and food deserts are basically areas that do not provide fresh food. There is no food within a certain amount of square miles. I forget the exact number, but it's very, very hard for people to obtain fresh food. There's a lot of places in this country where the only store for miles is a Dollar Tree or a Dollar General, a Walmart. And actually, Walmart like does provide fresh produce. Dollar General, Dollar Tree, like these little stores don't. Yeah. Small grocery, or like not even grocery, like gas stations, are the only places that many people have. And while we do think of Walmart as like the poor man's grocery store, it's actually
better than a lot of other options.
Yes, exactly. Like, it has a lot more options than many places, and a lot of places don't even have Walmarts.
And that's why it's complicated when, once again, like, you're thinking of people who go, like we said, to, like, Whole Foods and stuff as, like, being more ethical and whatever. But it's, like, sometimes, like, places like Walmart is the ethical center.
Yeah. I remember when I went to college, I went to SUNY Oswego, and in our vicinity of school, we had a Walmart, we had one other grocery store, we did have a farmer's market, both one that would happen on Thursdays and also like a little actual like brick and mortar market where people would bring produce and stuff. But for the majority of your groceries, like, you were going to Walmart because that's where the bus went. There wasn't a bus that took you to that brick and mortar farmer's market. The other farmer's market was downtown, so it was kind of easy to get to. But the Walmart was the only place you could get to on the bus. And so if you don't have a car, which a lot of people don't, especially in these rural areas, like, most of the time there aren't enough jobs, let alone, like, the ability to own a car. But if you don't have a car, how are you getting to any of these places, right? So the only way to get to these places is by bus, and the bus goes to the Walmart.
Right.
So it's incredibly hard for people to even try and go to that little brick and mortar store, and we were lucky to have that, right? Like, where I went to school in Oswego's technically a city, but it's in one of the poorest counties in New York State. And a lot of people don't have access to get to that little brick and mortar place. They just have Walmart because that's where the bus takes them.
And I'm sure, like, it had to do partially with the fact that the school's right there. So,
yeah.
like, you know, there are more people who are going to go. So
exactly.
They have that transportation
and
access.
And we were, again, very lucky to live technically in, like, a city with a college and everything else. But the areas around us, like, they didn't have that access to even get to the bus to get to the Walmart. And I think that's something else that a lot of vegans often claim is that, well, vegan diet's technically cheaper than having meat in your diet, which can be true in certain areas, and it absolutely can be true for certain people, but it's not true for every single person in every single circumstance.
And when you have a family to feed, like, sometimes you don't really have another option.
Yeah.
You either, like, don't have the money to be spending on, like, more volume, or you don't have the time to be, like, preparing these dishes from scratch. And, like, not for nothing, but the vegan options that they have in terms of, like smart burgers and, like, those, like, processed fake meats and, like, certain tofus and stuff, like, those aren't any healthier than processed meat products.
Yeah.
And that's another problem, too, is that, like, there are now more options for people who are vegan and vegetarian, but are they healthier? Are they better for you? Do they still contain ingredients that are, like, bad for the environment? Yes.
Exactly. And that's, like, another thing that kind of just, like, spins into this whole debate around how ethical is this lifestyle and diet change. Again, you have to be very, very, very careful with, like, the way you're consuming if you actually care about, like, the ethical consumption piece of it, and not just maybe, like, not having animal products in your life, which is fine if that's really, like, that's the goal that you want, is to just not have animal products in your life. I think to add to, like, what we've been saying, really one of the reasons that people get so angry at vegans is because, like we've been saying, they have this holier than thou mentality, like they're better than everyone else because they don't consume animal products. And while it is very noble and I do think very humbling to not consume animal products and really put yourself in this position where you are spending more money and you are being a lot more thoughtful about the things that you consume and things like that.
It takes effort.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing, and it's something I do in my personal life. Like, that's something I do quite often, is think about the things I consume, and even, again, like, spend a little bit extra to get things that I find to be more ethical, yada yada. But I don't go around telling people that they're horrible people and that they're murderers because they don't eat vegan. And I think that is part of the problem, and that's where people end up getting very, very defensive.
Yes.
Is because, like, they don't, like, want to hear that. And if you want to bring up veganism, like, hey, like, I just think it's a little bit better and this is my point of view, and you know, people will still attack you for it, for sure. Like, I think vegans do take a lot of shit, and they get a lot of shit, and I'll give them that. Like, vegans get a lot of shit, like, a lot.
Yeah.
Especially by, like, just, like, people who are really into meat. Like, they just get a lot of shit, and it's not fair. Like, just the same way that you don't want a vegan to tell you how to eat, don't tell someone else how to eat.
Exactly.
No, stop.
It's not your business.
It's not your business. But again, I think vegans are very outspoken when it comes to, like almost hunting people down and saying that they're horrible people because they consume meat. Or I've worked in vegan spaces before, and I remember, like, you know, I'm a vegetarian, and people would ask me, like, oh, like, is the person that you're with, or, like, are your parents vegan, or blah, blah, and I'd be like, no, like, they're not, and they'd literally give me, like, dirty looks. Like,
as if you have control over them.
I'm, like, not gonna sit here and force anyone else to be vegan. Like, that's not my problem.
Yeah.
I personally do this for myself. And, like, it's not like they also had family members or friends around them that were, I mean, they had friends and stuff that were vegan, but they didn't all have family, and, like, every single person around them was vegan.
Like, I'm not gonna cut people out simply for their diet.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's very harsh.
Yeah, and, like, there are certain things that, like, you know, to be fair, like, it does kind of suck when you're not supported by your family.
Absolutely.
But that's not necessarily, like, a reason to be so entitled to say that, like, I'm just better than them because I'm vegan, right? Like, also, on top of the monetary constraints and the environment constraints, there are also, like, actual dietary constraints where people cannot go vegan.
Yeah.
Not everyone has the ability dietarily or health-wise to become vegan. Like you were saying, like, you know, you can gain muscle on a plant-based diet, but it's very, 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 very hard. It's very time-consuming.
And it's expensive. Like, you need to have the correct products. You need to be able to, like we're saying, like, eat the correct volume. Because, like, just as, like, a baseline vegan, you obviously just have to consume more. But when you're trying to build muscle or gain weight, like, you have to consume a lot of fucking food in order to do that, in order to meet those goals. And that's just not practical or obtainable for everyone.
And if someone's trying to gain weight or gain muscle, it's quite difficult to do that on a plant-based diet. And I totally get that. I was watching this documentary the other day, and it was called You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment. It's on Netflix. I do recommend it. I thought it was pretty interesting. But it was basically this experiment where they took identical twins and they put one on an omnivore diet and one on a fully vegan diet. And the first week they had them, like, they had preset meals that they would just heat up, basically. And then the next week they had them make their own meals and, like, buy their own ingredients and stuff. And the reason they did it on identical twins, which I thought was so fascinating, was because a lot of genetic factors can, like, contribute to how much muscle you gain, how much fat you lose, all these types of things. And that can't necessarily be measured from person to person, but it can when you have two people who have the identical genes, which I thought was so
really
fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Stop experimenting on animals, experiment on twins instead. Hot take.
They've already done that, though.
Yeah, true.
In the Holocaust!
We went there.
It happened!
When Hitler was doing something right.
Oh my god.
Anyway.
Yeah, but it was really fascinating to see how that worked out between the twins. And like we were saying, like, their results did find that a lot of the twins that were on the vegan diet either didn't gain any muscle or just, like, lost muscle, while they did end up losing, like, fat. And a lot of the vegan twins did feel, like you were saying, like, a lot lighter, a lot healthier. They did feel better, but they did end up losing a lot of muscle. Or not a lot, but they did lose muscle, or they maintained muscle, and that was kind of it. There were definitely some people who I don't think stuck to it as much as they should have, but it was a really interesting documentary. I'll link it in the show notes so that people can watch it, but that's something I think that we do have to consider, is the fact that, like, our genetics play a huge role, and also our goals in our bodies play a huge role in our diets. Yeah. And also there are people who are highly allergic to certain things, have certain medical conditions. I know a lot of celiacs tend to not be vegan because it's very hard to be vegan and gluten-free. There are people who, of course, do it, and it is something that a lot of people do, but it can be quite difficult. And there are also people just with different types of dietary restraints that can't necessarily go vegan for different reasons. And I think that's something we have to consider.
Yeah, and that's why I know this is not like a super duper common argument, but like this happens on both sides where people will argue somehow. I think this is really fucking stupid, but people will try to argue that like humans are built to be vegan, or they'll argue that they're built to be carnivorous. And I think like, all right, let's be real. Like, we're built to be omnivores. We've always been omnivores. Like, look at past humans who have existed at basically any point in time. Like, look at our bone structure, our teeth, like our digestive systems. Like, we are built to eat both. Now, like, does that mean that everyone has to eat both? No. But at the same time, like you're saying, like, just because overall humans have the capability to eat both, you know, people can still eat whatever they want, and people are going to be built in different ways where, like, they can only handle certain ingredients and certain foods, and, like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Now, that's where it becomes annoying when people try to force a diet onto someone else, because it's like, yeah, in general, humans might be capable of certain things, but every individual body is different, and, like, leave people alone and let them do what's best for their body.
I agree. And I think that's a great point to end on for this part 1 of veganism versus carnivorism. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in part 2. Thank you for listening to Bell on Earth, the podcast. We hope that your minds have been expanded and your pussies have been opened.
Be sure to rate and follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music.
This podcast is brought to you by Free Studio Productions. It's hosted and produced by Cassidy and Casey Bell. Big thanks to our executive producer, Derek Benton.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for all of your content needs. See you later, haters.